For 250 years, every American man who owned land worked it with his hands. Not with a contractor, not with a service call, not with a replacement part shipped in and installed by a stranger. With his own hands, using tools he understood completely, producing things that lasted because he knew how to make them last. The bench was in the barn, the tools hung on the wall. The knowledge of how to use them passed from father to son the same way it was demonstrated. Not in a classroom, not from a book, shown, once, maybe twice, then practiced until it was no longer a lesson but a capability. Between 1916 and 1960, that world was dismantled by zoning codes that reclassified working land as residential land, by school boards that updated curricula to reflect an industrial economy that no longer needed men who could build from raw material, by a supply chain that made it cheaper to buy than to make, until the knowledge of how to make things stopped being passed down entirely. 9 skills everyone practiced on American land for generations, everyone zoned out of reach, stripped from the curriculum, or surviving only in the hands of a few who sought it out deliberately. And we're putting it back on the record. Number 9. The draw knife. A blade with a handle at each end pulled toward the body across green wood clamped in a shaving horse. A simple foot-operated bench that freed both hands for the cut. Axe handles, chair legs, fence rails, barrel staves, all shaped this way, with a precision and feel for grain that no powered tool has fully replicated. The shaving horse and draw knife together were present on virtually every American homestead that worked wood before 1920. Teaching draw knife work commercially today requires in most jurisdictions a commercially zoned property and compliance with manufacturing regulations that make no distinction between a man shaping a single handle and an industrial production facility. The tool costs $40. The knowledge of how to use it, the correct grain orientation, the angle of the blade, the feel of wood cutting cleanly versus tearing has been absent from any formal curriculum for 70 years. The shaving horse itself was not purchased from a supplier. It was built from a single log, split and shaped with the same draw knife it was designed to hold. The foot pedal clamped the work against a pivot board. Release the foot and the work moved freely. Press it and the clamp locked with enough force to hold green timber against a hard pole. A craftsman who could not build his own shaving horse could not begin the work that required one. The two were inseparable, tool and bench, each making the other possible. Number 8. The froe and riving. Riving is the splitting of wood along the grain using a froe, a heavy L-shaped blade driven by a mallet rather than sawing across it. Riven wood follows the natural grain of the timber, producing a surface stronger, more flexible, and more weather-resistant than sawn wood of identical dimensions. A riven fence rail did not rot at the ends the way a sawn rail did, because the grain ran continuously from one end to the other with no fibers cut across. A riven shingle shed water cleanly for decades longer than a sawn one of identical thickness. Fence rails, shingles, and barrel staves were riven on the working homestead. They outlasted sawn equivalents by a generation. Riving was taught in manual arts programs in American public schools through the early 1950s. Removed not because it ceased to work, but because it was not relevant to an industrial economy that produced sawn lumber in quantity. The economy needed workers who could assemble from standardized parts. It did not need workers who could produce the parts themselves from raw timber. The froe itself was often made by the homesteader's own blacksmith, another entry on the companion list of iron skills that were zoned and regulated out of reach in the same period. The loss of one skill accelerated the loss of the others. When a man could no longer make his own iron tools, he could no longer make the tools that worked the wood. The losses compounded. Number 7. Sharpening to a true working edge. Not running a blade across a pull-through sharpener. The hand sharpening of a tool, chisel, plain iron, axe, draw knife, on progressively finer abrasive stones until the edge is sharp enough to shave hair from the back of the hand. This requires understanding the geometry of each specific tool, the correct bevel angle for the work it does, the feel of a flat back against the stone, the sound of the blade on the stone that tells an experienced hand when the wire edge has formed and when it has been properly removed. A dull tool is a dangerous tool. It requires more force, which reduces control. Every craftsman who worked wood or leather by hand sharpened his own tools as daily maintenance, not as a specialized skill, but as upkeep, the same as oiling a hinge. The progression of stones mattered as much as the technique. A coarse stone removed metal quickly but left a ragged edge. Each finer stone refined the scratch pattern left by the last, until the final stone left an edge that reflected light in a single unbroken line. Running a finger across that edge, feeling for the wire burr on the back of the blade was the test. When the burr was gone and the edge clean on both faces, the tool was ready. Number 6. Mortise and tenon joinery by hand. The structural joint of American timber frame construction. A tenon, a projecting tongue cut on the end of one timber, fits precisely into a mortise cut in the face of another. Secured with a wooden peg driven through an offset hole that pulled the joint tight as the peg was driven home. The connection was stronger than the timber itself. American barns built this way in the 18th century are standing today. The tools required are a chisel, a mallet, and a saw. The knowledge required is geometry, an understanding of wood movement, joint proportion, and the behavior of the type of wood being cut. The offset in the peg hole, called draw boring, was the detail that separated a joint that would loosen over time from one that would tighten. The peg was driven through a hole in the tenon deliberately offset from the hole in the mortise, pulling the two faces together as the peg was driven and holding them permanently. A man who understood draw boring built structures that did not require maintenance. A man who did not built structures that needed refastening every decade. A man who frames with a nail gun has learned nothing transferable to the next structural problem he encounters. Number 5. Cooperage. The making of barrels, buckets, kegs, and tubs from shaped wooden staves bound with iron hoops. Every frontier homestead needed cooperage. Barrels stored cider, salt pork, dried grain, and water. A functioning homestead required dozens of wooden vessels, and the man who could make and repair them was never without work. The cooper's tools, a draw knife, a jointer plane for truing the stave edges, a crows for cutting the groove that held the head, were present on working farms through the 19th century. The stave was riven, not sawn, split along the grain so the wood moved as a unit. A sawn stave swelled and shrank unevenly and eventually leaked. A riven stave moved with the moisture in the wood and stayed tight. The iron hoop held the assembly under compression, and the compression held the seal. No glue, no fasteners. Practicing cooperage commercially today, producing and selling wooden vessels from a residential property, runs directly into light industrial zoning restrictions in most American municipalities. The vessel is not illegal. The act of making it for sale from a home workshop in a residential zone is. Number 4. Spoke shaving and wheelwork. The spoke shave, a small plane with handles on both sides of the blade, shaped the curved profiles of wheel spokes, chair rungs, and tool handles where a draw knife was too coarse and a full plane too large. Wheelwork required not only the spoke shave but an understanding of the whole system, how spoke length related to hub diameter, how the dish of the wheel distributed load under uneven terrain, how the iron tire was fitted and shrunk onto the wooden wheel, with heat and water in a sequence that required 2 or 3 men working in coordination. Tire itself was an iron ring forged slightly smaller than the wooden wheel it was meant to fit. Heated in a fire until it expanded, it was dropped over the wheel and driven down with hammers by 2 or 3 men working fast. Then quenched with water before it could char the wood. As it cooled, it contracted, crushing the entire assembly under tension that no fastener could replicate. A wheel tired this way did not loosen. A frontier community that could not maintain its own wheels could not move. The wagon was the supply chain. The spoke itself had to be shaped to an exact taper, wider at the hub, narrower at the rim, and the shoulder where it met the hub mortise had to be cut square and tight. A loose spoke wobbled, A wobbling wheel broke its axle at the worst possible time. Tolerances were not preferences. They were the difference between a vehicle that functioned and one that did not, measured by the feel of the fit in the hands of a man who had done this work enough times to know. That man no longer exists in any number. Number 3. Pit sawing. Before the sawmill, before the lumberyard, before the delivery truck, there was the pit. A log suspended over a rectangular pit dug into the ground. One man on top, one man below. Between them, a long two-handed rip saw that cut along the grain from one end of the log to the other along a chalk line. Slow, exhausting, and the source of every plank and every structure built in colonial America before water-powered mills became common enough to replace it. Pit sawing required 2 men in absolute coordination, maintaining a straight line, managing the weight of the saw, reading the grain ahead of the cut for knots and irregular figure that would catch or deflect the blade. The man on top guided the cut along the chalk line. The man in the pit pulled the return stroke and called out when the cut was drifting. 2 men, no instruments beyond a line of chalk, and from that a plank true enough to lay a floor or frame a wall that would stand for 2 centuries. Number 2. Bark tanning. Bark tanning used the tannin-rich inner bark of oak, chestnut, or hemlock, ground to a coarse meal, soaked in water to produce a tanning liquor, and used to cure hides over months in a series of progressively stronger pits. The result was firm, dense leather suited to sole construction, harness work, and industrial belting. Every tannery in colonial and early American life operated on this principle. The materials were available on any wooded property, and the process required no purchased chemicals. The EPA permit requirements for commercial tanning today were written for chromium sulfate processing, a 20th century industrial method that produces genuinely hazardous wastewater. Bark tanning produces no such waste. The regulatory framework makes no distinction. A man wanting to operate a small bark tannery on his own land, producing a dozen hides a year by methods unchanged from the 18th century, faces the same permit requirements as a chrome tannery processing 10,000 hides a week. The hides move through pits in sequence, the liquor strengthening at each stage over weeks that could not be shortened. A tanner who understood this produced leather that lasted for decades. A tanner who rushed produced leather that lasted a season. There is no longer any institutional context in which this distinction is taught. Number 1. Rope making from plant fiber. Hemp, flax, Indian hemp, basswood bark, twisted first into yarns, then into strands, then into rope on a simple rope walk. A hook mounted to a post and a grooved board any carpenter could build in an afternoon. Every frontier farmstead that needed rope made it from materials grown or harvested on the property. Rope was not purchased, it was made. The knowledge of fiber preparation, the direction of twist at each stage, and the relationship between strand count and finished rope strength was ordinary competence, the kind every working farm required and every working farm possessed. Commercial hemp cultivation was federally prohibited from 1937 through 2018, 81 years under the Marijuana Tax Act. That single prohibition eliminated the primary fiber crop of American homesteaders for 3 generations. The rope-making knowledge survived in isolated pockets. The fiber supply was legally severed. The twist of the yarn determined the twist of the strand, and the twist of the strand determined the lay of the rope, each stage opposing the direction of the last, so the rope tightened under tension rather than unraveling from it. A man who made his own rope understood that relationship in his hands. A man who purchased it never needed to. Knowledge that cannot be practiced dies with the generation that held it. And for 81 years, the law made sure it couldn't be practiced. 9 skills, not lost to time, not made obsolete by better methods. Zoned, regulated, and curriculum stripped out of a way of life that sustained this country for 2.5 centuries. The draw knife, the froe, the shaving horse. These aren't museum pieces. They show up at farm auctions across the country every weekend, recognized as antiques precisely because nobody makes them anymore. A cooperage barrel that's still tight. A Mortise timber frame that hasn't shifted in a century. The fact that these things still exist is the argument. They were built to last because the men who built them knew no other way to build. What is missing is the person standing next to you showing you how. and the willingness to accept that this knowledge was allowed to disappear not because it failed, but because it was inconvenient for the economy that replaced it. We are writing it down while we still can. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any. Was there anything you expected to see on this list that was missing? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.